At 5 a.m., my newly divorced ex-wife knocked on my door, and the confession she came to make would unravel everything I thought I knew about why our marriage ended. I'm Daniel, 38, an architect who spends his days building homes for other people, but couldn't save the one thing he built for himself. 5 years ago, Grace, my wife, my cellist, the woman who set down her bow to hold up my dreams, signed the divorce papers across the same kitchen table where we once planned our whole life. I let her walk out that door, believing she didn't want me. But at 5 a.m., in the freezing October rain, she was standing on my porch again, soaked to the bone, shaking, and not from the cold. She looked at me the way she used to, before everything broke, and whispered that our divorce had been built on a silence that neither of us ever chose. But what silence? What could a newly divorced woman possibly confess at 5 a.m. that couldn't wait for morning? After 5 years of saying nothing at all, what did she find last week that sent her running through the rain to the doorstep of the man she'd already let go? And why, after everything, was I praying she wouldn't leave again before I heard it? I didn't sleep much anymore. That's the first thing you should know about me. Somewhere in the last 5 years, sleep and I had come to an agreement. It would visit for an hour or two, and I would stop expecting more. So when the knock came, 3 hard raps against the wood, I was already awake, sitting in the dark of my kitchen with a coffee going cold in my hands. Nobody knocks at 5 a.m. with good news. My first thought was the hospital, my mother, an accident. My heart was already climbing into my throat as I crossed the cold floor in my bare feet. The rain drumming so loud against the windows, it sounded like the house was underwater. I opened the door, and the whole world stopped. Grace. 5 years, and she was standing right there, close enough to touch. Her dark hair was plastered flat against her face. Her coat was soaked through, hanging heavy off her shoulders. Her lips were pale, almost blue, trembling, and her eyes, God, her eyes, were red and swollen, like she'd been crying for 100 miles. Grace, her name came out of me broken, like I'd forgotten how to say it. For a second, she just looked at me. The rain poured off the edge of the roof between us like a curtain, and in that second, 5 years collapsed into nothing. The gray at my temples, the divorce papers, the silence, gone. She was just Grace, and I was just the man who used to love her more than his own breath. I'm sorry, she whispered. Her voice was shaking so badly I almost couldn't hear it over the storm. I know I shouldn't be here, but I couldn't wait. I couldn't wait one more minute, Daniel. You're soaked, I said stupidly, because my brain had stopped working. How long have you been out there? I don't know. She let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. I've been driving all night. I didn't even feel the rain. Driving all night. From where? She lived 2 hours away. In the city, the last I'd heard, which meant she'd left around 3 a.m., which meant something had happened, something big enough to pull her out of her bed in the dark and put her on the road before dawn. Come in, I said. Please, you're freezing. She hesitated at the threshold, and I understood why. This wasn't our house. This was the house I'd bought after her. Smaller, quieter, a place with no ghosts in the corners. She had never set foot in it. Crossing that doorway meant something, and we both felt it. Then she stepped inside. I grabbed the blanket off the back of the couch and wrapped it around her shoulders, and for one aching heartbeat my hands were on her again, and neither of us moved. She smelled like rain and cold air, and underneath it, faint and familiar, like the lavender soap she'd used for as long as I'd known her. That smell reached into my chest and squeezed. You can divorce a person. You can hand back the ring and split the furniture and learn to sleep alone. But nobody tells you how to divorce a smell, how to unlearn the way a person's presence rearranges the air in a room. Sit, I said, my voice rougher than I meant it. I'll make you something warm. She sat at the edge of my kitchen chair, both hands wrapped around the mug I gave her, and I noticed her fingers. Those long, elegant cellist's fingers I used to watch for hours. They were moving. Restless, turning the mug around and around like she was searching for the courage to say whatever she'd driven through a storm to say. Grace, I sat down across from her, slow, the way you'd approach something wounded. What happened? Talk to me. She looked up, and the look on her face wasn't the look of a woman who'd stopped loving me. I'd carried that other look for 5 years, the flat, tired, faraway look she'd worn across the kitchen table the day she signed the papers. I'd built my whole understanding of our ending around that look. She checked out. She stopped wanting this. She stopped wanting me. But this was something else entirely. "I found it," she said. "Found what?" Her breath hitched. "The letter." The word landed in the room and just sat there. I didn't understand it. I turned it over in my mind, looking for a door it might open, and found nothing. "What letter, Grace?" "I don't—" "The one you wrote me." Her voice cracked right down the middle. "The one you sent to Maria's house. 4 years ago." And the floor dropped out of the world. I hadn't thought about that letter in years. I'd trained myself not to. It was the most naked, most desperate thing I'd ever written. 4 pages. In the terrible winter a year after the divorce, when the loneliness had gotten so loud I couldn't stand it anymore. 4 pages telling Grace I'd been a coward, that I'd let her go because my pride couldn't survive hearing her say she needed space, that I'd rather have died than admit how much I still loved her. I'd begged her, actually begged, to let me try again, to meet me, to give us one more chance. I sent it to her sister Maria's address, because in the divorce, Grace had moved, and I didn't have her new one. And then I waited. For weeks I checked the mailbox like a starving man. For weeks I lay awake, imagining her reading it, imagining a phone call, a knock, anything. Nothing ever came. And I did the math the only way a heartbroken man knows how. I told myself. She read it. She read every word of me tearing my own heart open on the page. And she chose not to answer. That silence had been the final nail. That silence was the thing that finally, truly, killed it in me. Because a letter can be lost, but a choice to say nothing, that's an answer. That's the loudest answer there is. "You never wrote back," I heard myself say. My voice sounded far away, like it belonged to someone else. "I sent that letter, and I never got it." She was crying now, the tears running down over her cold cheeks, and she wasn't wiping them away. "Daniel, I never got it. I never even knew it existed. Not until 6 days ago." The mug went still in her hands. "Maria kept it," she whispered. The kitchen was so quiet, I could hear the second hand on the wall clock, ticking, ticking, like it was counting down to something. "She kept it," Grace said again. And now the words were coming faster, tumbling over each other. 5 years of them fighting to get out. "She hid it in a box in her attic. For 4 years, Daniel. 4 years. I was cleaning out her spare room last week, because she's moving, and I found this old shoebox, and your handwriting was on the envelope, and I sat down on that dusty floor, and I couldn't breathe. Why? It was all I could manage. Why would she? Because she thought she was protecting me." Grace's laugh was a terrible, wet, broken thing. "Because she watched me fall apart after the divorce, and she decided, all by herself, that going back to you would break me all over again. So she took your letter, and she buried it, and she let me believe you'd moved on, and she let you believe I didn't care." She pressed her trembling hand flat against her mouth. "She stole 4 years from us. 4 years, Daniel, and she never said a word." I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. I sat in my own kitchen at 5 in the morning and felt the entire architecture of my grief. Every wall I'd built, every story I'd told myself about why she left, why she never wrote back, why I wasn't enough. I felt all of it groan and shift on its foundation. Everything I believed about the end of my marriage was wrong. "There's more," Grace whispered. "Daniel, there's so much more. The letter isn't even the worst of it. There's a reason I left in the first place that I never told you. A reason I couldn't tell you back then." Her eyes came up to mine, huge and terrified and pleading. "And if you let me, I need to tell you all of it. Right now. Before I lose my nerve. Because I have spent 5 years being a coward. And I am done. I am so done being quiet." Outside, the rain kept falling. And I realized my hands were shaking as badly as hers. "Then tell me," I said. "All of it. I'm not going anywhere." Grace nodded, but she didn't start right away. She stared down into the coffee, like the words were somewhere at the bottom of the mug. And when she finally looked up, her voice was different, smaller, younger, like she'd traveled back to become the woman she used to be. "Do you remember the last year we were married?" she asked. "Really remember it?" I did. I remembered a house that had gone quiet. I remembered a wife who used to fill every room with music and had somehow stopped. I remembered reaching for her in the dark and feeling her already turned away. "I remember you pulling away from me," I said carefully. "I remember you getting further and further away, and me not knowing how to reach you." "That's what it looked like from the outside," she whispered, "but that's not what was happening on the inside. Daniel, I need you to hear the inside." She wrapped the blanket tighter around herself. "You know I stopped playing," she said. "The cello. You know I put it away that last year, but you never knew why, because I never told you. I let you think I was just busy, just tired, just distracted. You said you'd lost the love for it. My throat was tight. You said the music wasn't in you anymore. I lied." The word came out flat and hard. "The music wasn't gone, Daniel. I was gone. I didn't understand, and she saw it on my face, and she tried again. When we got married, I was somebody," she said. "I had my own name in my own world. I played in the symphony. I had my students, my recitals, my whole life that was mine. And then your career started to take off. And God, Daniel, I was so proud of you. I wanted to help you, so I started saying yes to things. Yes, I'll come to the dinner instead of my rehearsal. Yes, I'll move the recital so we can fly out for your project. Yes, I'll skip the audition this time." And every yes felt so small. Every single one felt like nothing. Her voice broke, but they added up, one at a time, for years, until one morning I woke up and I looked in the mirror and I did not know the woman looking back. I was just Daniel's wife. I planned Daniel's dinners. I decorated Daniel's houses. I was proud of Daniel's buildings. And somewhere in all of it, the woman who used to close her eyes and disappear into a piece of music for 3 hours straight, she was just gone. I had disappeared inside my own marriage. And I didn't even notice it happening until there was nothing left of me. The clock ticked on the wall. My coffee was stone cold, and I didn't care. "Why didn't you tell me?" I whispered. "Grace, if you'd just told me." "How?" The tears spilled over again. "How do you tell the man you love that being married to him is erasing you? How do you say that without it sounding like it's his fault? Because it wasn't your fault, Daniel. That's the thing that nearly killed me. You never asked me to give up a single thing. Not once. You would have carried my cello to every rehearsal in the state if I'd asked. I did this. I gave myself away, piece by piece, and then I hated myself for having nothing left, and I was so ashamed." She pressed her hand to her chest like it hurt. "I was drowning," she said. "And you can't explain drowning to someone standing on the shore. You just go under. And I was so scared that if I stayed, I'd disappear completely, until there was no Grace left at all. So I ran. I told myself I needed space. I told myself I had to leave to save whatever was left of me." Her eyes came up, wet and desperate. "But I never, ever stopped loving you. Not for one day. Leaving you wasn't me falling out of love, Daniel. It was me trying to survive. And I did it in the cruelest possible way, because I couldn't find the words to do it kind. And there it was. 5 years. 5 years I had carried one single poisonous belief in the center of my chest. She stopped wanting me. I wasn't enough. She looked at the life we built and found it lacking. I had let that belief shape everything. How I dated, how I slept, how I stood in a room, how I looked at myself in the mirror when I shaved. Not enough. Those 2 words had been the quiet soundtrack of 5 years of my life. And they were a lie. They were never true. Not once. I put my face in my hands. I'm not ashamed to say it. A grown man, 38 years old, sitting at his kitchen table in the dark, and my shoulders started to shake, because the grief I was feeling wasn't fresh. It was old. It was 5 years of grief I'd been carrying for the wrong reasons, and now it all had to be felt again. Correctly this time, and it was almost too much to hold. "Daniel," her voice was so gentle. "Daniel, look at me, please." I lifted my head. "When I found your letter 6 days ago," she said, "I read it sitting on that dusty attic floor, And I read it maybe 20 times. And every word, Daniel, every single word you wrote, it was everything I had been too afraid to say to you. You called yourself a coward for letting me go. And I sat there thinking, no, my love, I was the coward. We were two cowards on two sides of the same silence, and we let 4 years die in the gap between us. Because I couldn't say I was disappearing, and you couldn't say you still wanted me, and my sister decided she knew better than both of us. She reached across the table, slowly, giving me every chance to pull away. She didn't take my hand. She just laid hers down beside it, palm up, open, an offer, a question. And I looked at that hand, those long, restless cellist's fingers, and I couldn't move. Because there was a wall inside me that had taken 5 years to build, and it doesn't come down just because someone tells you the truth. My head believed her, every word, but my heart had been burned so badly that it flinched away from hope, like hope was a hot stove. I want to believe you, I said, and my voice was wrecked. God, Grace, you don't know how much I want to believe you, but I already lost you once. I already rebuilt my whole life around losing you, and if I let you back in, if I let myself hope again, and it falls apart a second time, I shook my head. I don't think I'd survive it. I'm being honest with you. I don't think there's enough of me left to survive it twice. Something flickered across her face. Fear, understanding, grief. I know, she whispered. I know I'm asking for something I have no right to ask for. I broke it. I know that. And I didn't drive here at 3 in the morning expecting you to open that door and just, forgive me. I'm not that naive. She took a shaking breath. But there's one more thing, and it's the real reason I couldn't wait for morning. The real reason it had to be tonight. My heart started pounding again. What is it? She reached into her soaked coat pocket. Her hand was trembling, and she pulled out something small and folded and worn. Paper that had clearly been read and reread 100 times, the creases going soft and gray. The letter. My letter. 4 years old and water-stained and falling apart at the folds. You wrote something at the very end of this, she said. The last line. Do you remember what you wrote? I didn't. I'd poured out 4 pages in a fever of loneliness and grief. I couldn't have told you a single sentence. You wrote, she said, and her voice finally completely broke. If you ever change your mind, even if it's 10 years from now, even if it's the middle of the night, come find me. I'll be waiting. I'll always be waiting. The room went absolutely silent. So I'm here, she whispered, tears streaming down her face, holding out 4-year-old paper in a trembling hand. It's the middle of the night, Daniel, and I changed my mind. I changed it 4 years ago. I just never got the chance to say it. Her whole body was shaking now. So I'm asking you, were you telling the truth when you wrote that you'd wait? Or was I 4 years too late? The letter trembled in her hand between us. Were you telling the truth? Or was I 4 years too late? And I sat there, and I couldn't answer, because the truth was too big to fit through my mouth. Here's what I've learned about the human heart, sitting in that kitchen chair at 5 a.m. It doesn't heal in a straight line. You can know something is true and still be terrified of it. I knew Grace was telling the truth. I knew it the way you know your own name. But knowing and trusting are 2 different countries, and there was an ocean between them. And I had spent 5 years convincing myself I could never cross it again. Say something, she whispered. Please, anything, even if it's no. I can't sit in the silence anymore, Daniel. The silence is what killed us the first time. And that word, silence, that's what finally moved me. Because she was right. It wasn't a lie that ended us. It wasn't even her sister. Not really. It was the silence. The things we didn't say. Me not saying I still want you. Her not saying I'm disappearing. 2 people who loved each other more than anything, sitting on 2 sides of a wall, each one waiting for the other to knock first, and neither one ever did. And I understood, with a clarity that took my breath away, that I was about to do it again. Right now, in this kitchen, I was about to let fear keep my mouth shut and let another silence swallow another chance. Not this time. I reached out, and I put my hand over hers, over the letter, over 4 years of water-stained paper. over those long, restless fingers that had gone completely still. "When I wrote that letter," I said, and my voice was shaking, "I meant every word. And the truth is, Grace, I never stopped waiting. Not for one single day. I told everyone I'd moved on. I bought a new house with no ghosts in it. I dated, I smiled at the right times. But I kept your sheet music in the drawer beside my bed, and every night before I slept, I'd look at it, and I'd think, maybe tomorrow she'll knock." Her face crumpled. "You kept my music?" she breathed. 5 years. I laughed, and it came out wet and broken. "Grace, I couldn't even throw away your music. How was I ever going to move on from you?" And then she was up out of her chair, and I was up out of mine, and I don't know which of us moved first. I've thought about it 100 times since, and I still can't tell you. But suddenly she was in my arms, soaked coat and cold skin and all, and I was holding her the way I'd held her 1,000 times in another life. And she was crying into my chest, and I was crying into her wet hair, and neither one of us said a single word. The silence this time wasn't the silence that killed us. This was the other kind, the kind that heals. We stood like that in my dark kitchen for a long, long time, while the rain finally, slowly, began to soften against the windows. And when she pulled back to look at me, her eyes were red and swollen and shining, and she was smiling. That smile, the one I thought I'd never see again, the one I used to build my whole day around. "I have to tell you something," she said, "and I need you to not laugh." I would never. I brought my cello. She wiped her face with the back of her hand and let out a shaky laugh. "It's in the car. I don't even know why I did it. I threw it in the back seat at 3 in the morning like a crazy person. But I think, Daniel, I think part of me knew that if you opened the door, if you didn't turn me away, I wanted to play for you again. Really play, the way I used to, before I disappeared. And that is the moment I knew we were going to be okay. Not because of the letter, not because of the confession, but because the woman standing in front of me wasn't the hollowed-out, disappearing Grace who'd signed those papers 5 years ago. This was a Grace who had gone away and done the terrifying work of finding herself again, who had picked up the bow and remembered her own name, who was whole, not because I completed her, but because she'd rebuilt herself, all on her own, in the dark, with nobody watching. She wasn't coming back to me to be saved. She was coming back because 2 whole people had finally found their way back to the same room. I went out into the last of the rain in my bare feet and carried her cello inside, and she sat down in the gray light of that early morning, still in her damp clothes, and she tuned it with those long fingers, and she closed her eyes, and she played. I don't have the words for what it sounded like. I'm an architect, not a poet, but I'll tell you this. It sounded like 5 years of things we never said. It sounded like an apology and a promise and a homecoming all braided into one. It sounded like a woman who had found her way back to herself, playing for the man who'd waited on the other side of a silence neither of them chose. The sun came up while she played. It came through the kitchen window and landed on her face, and I watched the woman I loved make music in my home for the first time, and I understood that some things don't break the way you think they broke. Some things were only ever waiting, buried in an attic, folded in a coat pocket, tucked in a drawer beside a lonely man's bed, waiting for somebody, anybody, to finally be brave enough to knock. We married again the next spring. Small this time. Just us, her sister. Yes, Maria. Forgiveness is its own long story, and Grace decided that carrying that anger would only steal more years, and she was done letting anything steal her years. And a handful of people who loved us. Grace played at our wedding. She plays everywhere now. She teaches again. She has her name back, in her own world, and I have never once asked her to give up a single thing, and she has never once disappeared again. Because now, when something is too heavy to carry alone, we say it, out loud, to each other, in the light. That's the whole secret, if you want to know it. That's what 5 years of silence taught us. Love doesn't die from the big, loud things. It dies quietly, in all the words we're too afraid to say, and it can come back to life the very same way, the moment somebody is brave enough to stand in the rain at 5 a.m. and finally finally speak. So let me ask you something, before you go. Is there a silence in your life right now? A truth you've been too afraid to say to someone you love? A letter you never sent? A door you've been waiting for someone else to knock on first? And what would it cost you? What has it already cost you? To keep waiting. Because if this story means anything at all, it's this. Don't let the most important thing you ever needed to say get buried in a box in somebody's attic. Say it, tonight, before the sun comes up. If this story touched your heart, take 1 second and tap that like button, and turn on the notification bell if you haven't yet, so you never miss the next story that reminds you what the human heart is really capable of. And tell me in the comments, what's the one thing you'd say to the one person if you knew you only had until 5 a.m.? I'll be reading every single one.